Good evening. Captain Retired Matt Edwards here with the next installment of the Observation Post Weekly Reports. I had myself flummoxed for a second. I was looking at an old version of my document that I was using, and it was screwing up, making myself gaslight. So I found the right one, and here we go. Point number 158. The Reserve Force Pension Plan and the Canada Pension Plan Disability definition of disability. Now you see, they seem to believe that all of the different government departments and agencies and entities can use their own definition. But that ain't true. Why isn't it true? Well, it would be absurd for all of these different agencies, all of these different, basically insurances, government departments, whatever, to use different definitions for the same thing. So the Reserve Force Pension Plan uses the Canada Pension Plan Disability definition, and that is a very strict definition that says you cannot do any work. But the thing is, the Canada Pension Plan Disability is supposed to be a right. If you can't work and you contribute it to the fund, you should be able to get it when you become disabled. But it seems like they don't want to pay it out because it costs the pension plan money. So in 1964, on November the 18th, I believe, the Minister of Health and Welfare, Judy LaMarche, was asked a question by Mr. Chatterton. And he said, listen, what's going to happen if a disabled, well, actually, no, I'm on the wrong track. Around that same time, that she talked about the fact that Canada Pension Plan Disability was going to be help as of right. Now that's in opposition to help as of need. So help as of need is when the government is going to help someone who is needy. They might be disabled, they might be poor, but they'll help people that are special needs. But the Canada Pension Plan Disability is supposed to be like any other pension property that you get back if you become disabled. So her words is that you're going to get your help as of right, well, because pensions are rights. Now, the Reserve Force Pension Plan that I was talking about, they link the pension I paid into to the Canada Pension Plan Disability. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there is no agreement between these two separate agencies. So they told me when I applied for my my Reserve Force Pension Plan, which is a regulatory pension under the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, they said, we can't pay you your pension. You have to decide if you're going to take a deferred annuity or if you're going to take a return of contributions. To which I said, where is my immediate annuity for becoming disabled? Oh, you have to apply for the Canada Pension Plan Disability in order to get that. I said, why should I have to do that? I said, the Canadian Forces certified me as being too disabled to continue serving. So the government already certified me, the Army doctor. They said I was unfit for service during my biannual medical, because after your age 40, they do it every 2 years, annual medicals, and before age 40, it's every 5 years. So when I was 41 or so, I went for my medical, and they said, well, you know, you don't meet the occupational medical category, you know, MedCat, for your trade. So then they had 3 other doctors review that doctor's report, and they had what used to be called a Career Review Medical Board, but these days it's called an Army Review Medical Employment Limitations Board. So the first doctor's stuff is, reviewed by 3 other doctors, and they can decide to retain the Canadian Forces member without any limitations. They can decide to retain the medical with medical limitations, and they can also decide to medical release because, well, the Army don't need you no more. So in my case, they decided that I was going to be medically released under the item 3B. Now, in the Queen's Regulations and Orders 15.01, there are 2 medical release categories. Now, 3A is the any occupation definition of disability, and 3B is the own occupation of disability. Now, let me explain how that's important. The Canada Pension Plan Disability, because it relates to all employment, that's a 3A type pension. My Reserve Force pension plan ought to be, like the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension, a 3B pension, which is your own trade. If you can't do your own trade, if you can't do your own job, you should get your pension. But the Canadian Forces Administration, Pension Administration people said to me that I had to get Canada Pension Plan Disability in order to get my pension. Now, I've sent in all kinds of stuff, told them to go to hell. That was bullshit. They eventually accepted the fact that I got Health Canada to certify my disability for the Public Service Superannuation Act pension, because I was a civil servant in addition to a soldier. So I was with Canada Revenue Agency as a tax collector, and I was also serving as a captain in the reserves. So the guy I was talking to seemed to be reasonable. Oh, he said, well, you know, you sent in the disability tax certificate, you sent in this, and you sent in that. And I see that the definition of disability in the Public Service Superannuation Act is very similar to the Canada Pension Plan Disability. So you know what? We'll approve your Reserve Force pension plan. You know, we'll give you your pension. We'll give you your property back. Now, see, here's the bullshit about that. I was looking recently at the 2019 actuarial report for the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension, and they had very few people listed as being disabled and in receipt of a Reserve Force pension plan. Where was I, for example? Because I don't think they even had anybody listed as being disabled and getting a disability pension. So it seems that they've subsumed, combined the 3B medical releases with normal retirement pensions. That's bullshit. In fact, I requested my pension papers once under the Privacy Act, and I got a copy of it on it that said I wasn't a disability release. Now, if I was medically disabled and unable to do my trade, and the Army doctor said so, and I was medically released and separated from my career, separated from my property, because here's a little bit of trivia for you. A Canadian Forces member is not an employee. They don't have a contract of employment. They own property, an office of employment. Now, the office of employment carries with it a salary, but it is property, but the right to get that salary is because you own the property. Knight, Supreme Court of Canada, don't remember the year, and Wells, Andy Wells, Supreme Court of Canada, 1996 or 1998. Because what happened in the Andy Wells case is that the provincial government wrote a law, took his job out of the law, and he appealed to court. Now, the court said the government can take away his right to his job, you know, his property, the office of employment, but it cannot take away, without giving him financial compensation, the income that goes with that property. You see? So this is the thing. They separated me from my property. They kicked me to the curb like they do with many people. You know, usually is between 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 people per year gets medical release. 2018, I don't have statistics for any year past 2018. 2018 had 2,500 people get medical release. Another bit of trivia. Cost $250,000 to train a soldier who gets released, and then somebody else has to be trained up to their trade. So there's a financial cost to the taxpayer for medically releasing people. They probably should try to find some way to accommodate them, retain them, you know, within their medical employment limitations. Anyway, my point about this is that they ought to be reasonable. They ought to have the same definition at CRA, the same one at CPP, the same one at Canadian Forces pension, and the Public Service and the RCMP pension. But the Public Service Superannuation Act pension is wrong, and the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act pension, Section 2, is right. The Canadian Forces Superannuation Act defines disability as being unable to do your own trade. A very reasonable definition, considering if that's what you're doing and you become disabled, you ought to get your pension. Now, the Public Service and the RCMP Superannuation Act pensions have a very similar definition as the Canada Pension Plan, and I bet you the government would like to make the Canadian Forces one like the other two, but in reality what they ought to do is make the other two like the Canadian Forces pension. Now, carrying on to the second issue, second point that I was planning on covering tonight. Number 159 on my list, the 2019 letter that was sent out. Who and how many? Now, sometimes I wish I made better notes, because what was I talking about? But I think I was talking about the additional pain and suffering compensation letter, because they changed the name of it. Now, I might also have been thinking of that issue with the supplementary retirement benefit, because that was a lawsuit that was recently started, I believe. I'm not sure who the plaintiff is, but I know Sean Barea has something to do with it. And they really screwed a pooch there, as far as I know. I've been bitching about this, complaining about that for a while, because I looked at the number of people that are getting, say, the career impact allowance that was changed to the additional pain and suffering compensation in 2019. But there was the career impact allowance supplement, and the numbers, when I looked at what was listed on Veterans Affairs Canada's annual statistics, the numbers of those approved for the SRB, the Supplementary Retirement Benefit, seemed to be those that were approved for the Career Impact Allowance, or actually the other way around, Career Impact Allowance Supplement, which is smaller. They have less people getting the additional supplement. But what they ought to be doing is what in 2006, when the Canada Gazette came out, they said that we're going to pay the Permanent Impairment Allowance, that was the original name, to anybody who can't work. So after 2 years of rehabilitation, if you weren't rehabilitated enough to get back to work, they were supposed to compensate you for loss of promotion and seniority with the Permanent Impairment Allowance. But the government, Veterans Affairs Canada, acted as if the Permanent Impairment Allowance was simply a new name for the Exceptional Incapacity Allowance, which was only paid out to 98% or higher disability level on their table of disabilities. So if they assessed you as 98% or higher, then in the old days under the Pension Act, you would get an Exceptional Incapacity Allowance to go along with the basic pension. But when they created the new Veterans Charter in 2006, they were supposed to change the EIA to the PIA, but they also changed the purpose of it. They said it was for not being able to work. Well, they screwed the pooch. So over the years, they changed the name a couple times, and then they made it tax-free even, because they seem to want to call it additional pain and suffering compensation to try to justify it as being a tax-free compensation instead of an economic award, which is what they called it in 2006, which was taxable according to them. Anyway, moving on, because I don't want to be here all night, and you probably don't want to be here all night watching. Number 160, and this relates to the previous point I made. Medical release data. Now, where do they have those statistics? I should look it up. Maybe someone knows where to get it. I said maybe I could use the income replacement benefit as a proxy. Now what I mean by that is those statistics I mentioned about the SRB in 2019. Well, they probably got statistics about how many people are on income replacement benefit, and that is almost always automatically approved on medical release, except in the case of a reservist. Of course, we're always left out. Now, in the case of the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, that has been automatic since 1999, except for the reservist. Because of Section 41A.3 of the policy, they said to the reservist that you had to prove to us that you were hurt in service. Now, My point about the proxy thing is that I'd like to figure out a way to get it if they haven't been able to provide it, because I've asked these bastards for that information lots of times. I've asked the Ombudsman, I've asked the Veterans Affairs, and I've asked whoever, Member of Parliament. Nobody seems to want to give us the data that we can then use to extrapolate and figure things out. Okay, number 161. The right to sue and SISIP/IRB. While the Pension Act pension involved the exchange of the right to sue for compensation for injury in military service, there is no such exchange of rights for the program arrangement partners. Now, that was many words I put in there, and I did that to get a lot of shots at them. Back in 2006, when they were bringing in the new Veterans Charter, they decided to get together and have a program arrangement. Now, they make it sound like they can get together and agree to sell out, screw over, blade the disabled Canadian Forces veteran. And what they decided to do was to use the contribution-based, premium-based insurance as the first provider of income replacement benefits. So that means that Veterans Affairs Canada claws back the service income support insurance plan. Now, they would justify it by saying, mark my words, that you can't be compensated twice for the same thing. Now, if the service income support insurance plan was compensation for anything, I'd agree with them. If the income replacement benefit was compensation for anything, I'd agree with them. But you buy SISIP by paying contributions, paying the premium, and you don't get it unless the risk happens. So it is a non-indemnity, which means it doesn't compensate for anything, and contributory insurance. As such, it's immune, it's supposed to be in the law, from clawbacks. Now, not only is it supposed to be immune from somebody else, like Veterans Affairs clawing it back, it's also supposed to be immune, or it doesn't have the authority, the jurisdiction, to claw anything back itself. Now, is that Matt Edwards just spouting off whatever he... No, I'm telling you what I've read in case law and in a 1994 British Law Review when they were looking at different insurances, and mostly it's about damages. Now, they were saying that non-indemnity and contributory insurance payments are the only one that doesn't have the right to claw back. So they said maybe we should give it to them. But the thing is that if you do, you're going to upset almost 100 years, well, over 100 years worth of law. Because in 1875, they said that damages in tort could not reduce the damages by the amount of insurance that a person gets. They said that was because the insurance is based on contract law, and you're not getting compensated for anything. You're merely getting a payment on when an event happens, a contingency happens. Okay? So that's why you're not supposed to take damages that you got to pay someone to make them whole and reduce it by their service income or other insurance plans or pensions. You're not allowed in the law, but they're getting away with it because nobody takes them to court. So they do it without having gone to court. In a perfect world, they should go to court, not us. And they should say to the judge, you know, Your Honor, we'd like to reduce our payment because the person's getting the service income support insurance plan. So Veterans Affairs Canada will go to court and they lay their case to the judge. And they'd say, we can't compensate this person twice for the same injury, and therefore, you know, that's why we're going to reduce our payment. Now the judge would look at that idiot and they'd say, aren't you aware of the previous common law, the precedents that, you can't reduce your compensation for something because the person gets a non-indemnity and contributory payment, like insurance or pensions. And then they refer to the person as the idiot to cases like the Salts British Columbia Court of Appeal case, which was an RCMP member who, when the province of BC had to pay damages, $980 or $30,000 or something like that, they had to pay damages to an RCMP member who got injured by another RCMP member, and they wanted to reduce the damages by her RCMP pension. Now, the judges, or judge in that case, said, I'm sorry, but those are non-indemnity and contributory pensions. They said if the person hadn't been injured, their pension would have been higher. Now, that's an interesting point, because the Canadian Forces members later over in Afghanistan, and they get blown up, okay? So then their career gets cut off. So they get medical release. So they get a reduced Canadian Forces pension, just like Nancy Wilson-Schultz in the Schultz case. And they might also get forced into getting the Canada Pension Plan Disability, which would be a reduced Canada Pension Plan, all because they got blown up in Canada's service. Now, if you think that's fair, then turn this off, because you shouldn't be watching. They should not be taking someone who put their life on the line, life and limb on the line. They shouldn't penalize them for getting injured in national service. It's just insane. Now, they would justify it, or try to justify it, by saying it's what everybody does. Well, just because everybody does it doesn't mean it's equitable, doesn't mean it's legal, doesn't mean it's fair. For example, they didn't even put into the Veterans Wellbeing Act regulations, they didn't even put into Section 22, they didn't put the Service Income Support Insurance Plan as a clawback. Now, that's an astounding act of stupidity. After doing up the program arrangement and giving themselves the authority to claw back, they didn't put it into the law. The program arrangement is not a law. It is not something that must be followed. Laws must be obeyed. But they never even put it into the law. Mark my words, that will bite them on the ass. Now, I was getting off track a bit. The right to sue thing I'm talking about is like workers' comp, okay? Workers' comp involves what they call the Great Compromise. So back in the 20s or so, a lot of industry, a lot of businesses were worried about going bankrupt because they might get sued by injured workers. So they arranged what they call the Great Compromise. It wasn't perfect, but it would be a thing called rough justice. Some people will get more compensation than they deserved, and some people will get less, but it would equal out in the end. Now, as part of that, the right to sue your employer for your injury was taken away by the government. But in exchange, you're supposed to get administrative compensation for that injury. Instead of having to go to court where you might lose, you get it automatically if you get hurt on the job. Now, the Pension Act is basically an exchange of the right to sue. How do I know that? Because they put into there Section 25 that said if you get workers' comp or if you get a lawsuit and tort, then they're going to reduce your Pension Act because of it. They also put into the Crown Liabilities and Proceedings Act Section 9, which says that if you have been compensated for an injury, then you can't sue the government. It's a bar on a lawsuit if you've already received compensation for the same event that caused the injury. You don't get compensated for the injury itself. You get compensated for the event that causes the injury. Now, how do I know that? Sarvanis, Supreme Court of Canada, 2002. They said that the Pension Act and other acts like it are paid based on the event that caused the injury, much like a lawsuit and tort. Therefore, that's why they said Crown Liabilities and Proceedings Act Section 9 did not apply to the Canada Pension Plan Disability. See, the government tried to pull a fast one when a guy got hurt in a prison. He fell off the roof. He ended up on Canada Pension Plan Disability. He also got compensated. The government wanted to take the Canada Pension Plan Disability into account, and they said they couldn't sue under the Crown Liabilities and Proceedings Act Section 9. The judges in the Supreme Court said, I'm sorry, these are two different animals. The Canada Pension Plan Disability is non-indemnity and contributory, and a lawsuit and tort is tort damages. You're paying to make the person whole. You can't reduce the amount of damages, which the lawsuit and tort, if you bear it, that's what you're doing. You can't give the person less than what you owe him because you hurt him or you're responsible for him getting hurt. You're not supposed to do that. You're not even supposed to ask. Anyway, number 162. Manuge settlement. increased payments clawed back by Veterans Affairs Canada without legal means, as SISIP is not covered under the Veteran Wellbeing Act Regulations, Section 22. Now, what I'm getting at, I bet you many people probably never thought of it. If you won the lawsuit, you were part of the SISIP class action lawsuit. Over 10 to 14,000 veterans were part of that lawsuit, and they ended up getting additional payments or getting new payments that if they had too high a payment under SISIP, then they would, they wouldn't have got, if they had too high a pension, they wouldn't have got a SISIP payment. Well, after the Manuge case remedied that, then that means they had higher service income support insurance money. Now, remember, Veterans Affairs Canada takes that into account. So, in essence, they wouldn't come out ahead because the income replacement benefit clawed back any additional winnings under the SISIP plan. Now, I said the same thing about the, trying to remember the name of it now, but he was a special forces operator and JTF, and he sued the government on the allowances, and he won. And I was talking to him, and I said, if you're getting income replacement benefit and you win a lawsuit and you get increased service income support insurance plan, then you won nothing. Because Veterans Affairs Canada will reduce their payment by the amount of what you won in court. Now, see, this is what I'm trying to say that should never happen. You shouldn't take someone to task, go to court, win your case, and end up with nothing. Why did you face litigation risk? Why did you go to court and spend all that time and effort and get a lawyer and take someone to court if at the end of the day you don't get anything? Think about how stupid that is. See, they ought not to, what they should have done in the Manuge case was, even if they were going to try to do something else, they should have said, listen, we're going to pass an order in council that says that we're not going to, and then whatever they're going to do. Like, for example, they should have said, we're not going to charge taxes. Now, why shouldn't they charge taxes? Because it was damages in contract, okay? The government, illegally, they broke the contract. They clawed back the value of the Pension Act. After they got caught and the judge said they couldn't do it, well, you didn't have a form of income that you got to pay taxes on, because even if it was, it would mitigate the damages and let the wrongdoer reduce their costs. Now, what incentive will the wrongdoer have to change their behavior if they're allowed to mitigate or eliminate their damages? And that's what tax does. So basically, they should not have, that's not one argument, a really good argument, it's irrefuttable, irrebuttable. But another one is that under Section 61F of the Income Tax Act, which is the alleged charging section for the Service Income Support Insurance Plan, Parliament put a word in there, periodic. Now, the people who got the payment after the lawsuit was over, they didn't get a periodic payment. They got a lump sum. So technically, in the law, Section 61F of the Income Tax Act does not fucking apply. But I know it applies because I saw lots of people's taxes when they were asking me. I had people that were part of the lawsuit. Tom Anderson over in Cape Breton, Newfoundland. He got charged $160,000, but he only had $145,000 in taxable income on his 2013 taxes. Now, you explain to me how the government can take 110% in marginal tax rate. That's fucking insane, and they should fix that shit. Even if he did have to pay taxes, he shouldn't have to pay more than what he got paid. That's insane. Anyway, better go on before I babbles all night. Okay, number 163, I'll make that 63, I'll make that my final point. I said I should set up a table for statutory deductions. We've already done that, sort of. Okay, here's the idea. A lot of people think that the money that's taken off if you're working, that it's all taxes. But it's not. There's statutory deductions, Like under the Canada Pension Plan Act, you take out contributions for the Canada Pension Plan, and it gets socked away, banked, for the future. Under the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, a Canadian Forces member's pay is reduced, and payments are put into the bank, into a trust, for the future. When income from the Office of Employment stops, you get income from the property known as the Canadian Forces Pension. So, employment insurance, that's a deduction under the Employment Insurance Act. Now, why this is important is that you can't just lump them all together. Taxes can be used for anything the government wants to put its mind to do. It can. That's the way taxes work. But contributions, on the other hand, must be legally used for the purpose with which it was collected. The Service Income Support Insurance Plan premiums are contributions, premiums for that insurance. You can't use the contribution for something else. That's what it has to be used for. The Canada Pension Plan, the contributions must be used for the Canada Pension Plan. The employment insurance premiums, it has to go into the employment insurance fund. They can't just slop it off and put it wherever they please. But the government doesn't seem to understand that. Like, they actually put into law, there's a caveat, under the Employment Insurance Act, they can actually use the premiums for that in their general revenue. But they shouldn't be allowed to do it. The Canada Pension Plan doesn't have a similar provision. Canada Pension Plan contributions have to be left alone. But they saw the employment insurance as a cash cow. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't owe it to it, but they can use it and churn it and move it around. At least that's the way I understand it. Listen, on that note, keep it short as I can. I shouldn't be doing this as much. One of these days I have to get off my butt and go take this to court or something. But I mean, here's the thing. You serve your country. You trust them, they trust you. Then a lot of shit happens and you start not trusting them. Now I don't trust the court system. As much as I don't, like I see too many cases going around. The Manuge case. He won, but the judge made a very big mistake. The judge said that the Pension Act pension was a non-indemnity and contributory. Well, I don't think he used the word contributory. But he said it was a non-indemnity payment, pain and suffering. And I think he got mixed up with non-economic. Okay? Because if you get pain and suffering compensation, it's still an indemnity, which is compensation. That's what it means. But an insurance plan or a pension that you pay into, that's your property. That's not compensation for any loss. That's not compensation for any damages. That's something you're going to get anyway. So you can't, reduce one because of the other. That's the rationale behind it. But he got it mixed up. He said that the Service Income Support Insurance Plan is an indemnity compensation for lost income. Now, if that had followed legal precedents, and there wasn't a Salts, British Columbia, the Cugliari versus White, Ontario Court of Appeal, the Botarelli versus Flanagan cases, basically the judge showed his ass. Because he ought to know, as a judge, he should know previous precedents. You can't just make stuff up on the fly that ignores previous precedents. That's what happened in the States recently with Roe versus Wade. They had settled law. They had the right to choose whether or not a woman wants to have an abortion. You might not agree with it, but it's her choice, and it was to their Supreme Court. Now, then the Supreme Court upends, kicks over the apple cart, upsets the apple cart, and changes the law. Now, everybody got used to that for 50 years. So that's what you call settled law. Now, the non-indemnity part of insurance is not being allowed to reduce damages and all that. That's been around since 1875 in the Bradburn versus Great Western Railway case in England. So you don't just upset the apple cart just because it doesn't please you, because like I said before, if you bring up the fact that they can take into account things too, which is what damages can do, they can take into account income and mitigate the damages. Well, who gets to deduct who? In the case of SISIP, if SISIP indemnifies you for lost income and the income replacement benefit indemnifies you for lost income, which they both don't do, then who has the right to take the other into account? That's a mess. When damages are not allowed to take insurance into account, then you have one party not being allowed to take something else into account, and it's something that will help the person who was injured. So anybody who wants to take something into account, they want to hurt the injured party, and they want to do that at the benefit of the person who did the hurting. It comes down to a moral, equitable issue. You should not reward the person who disabled another person. Because think about it, most of the tort cases, lawsuits for tort, are like car accidents and stuff, and people are disabled. So you don't give the person who put the person in a wheelchair, you don't give them a break at the expense of the person in the wheelchair that would have been healthy and able to walk around, but for the fucker that hit him. No. Better watch her. I'll be out here all night. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.